Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and you are joining me in the classroom. And I am here in the philosophical classroom, and we are talking about not Scientology, but we are, not groupthink, but we are. And what was that? No, nationalism and religious fanaticism. We really didn't get into that, which is perfectly fine. And then now talking about the Lost Boys. So let's make sure I've got everything going. And I do. And so I talked to you about this book by Gina Perry, which is The Lost Boys. And since we talked, I received it in the mail. And so I got it out of the mail yesterday. And so Sunday. I think it was Sunday that I got it out of the mailbox. And then read and, got about that far through it, this much through it. So not very far through it, but really, it kind of is a page turner. It really is. As much as there isn't a lot that has been said, it has been a page turner for me. One of the things that was a real page turner for me was how little we are taught that needs to be taught, and how it's been framed in psychology. I thought I had a bookmark right here. I do. How it's been framed in psychology to leave out really some speculation about what we're talking about, and then since the very beginning, and then to ostracize people who don't stick with the narrative that they want. Excuse me, hold on, I gotta get a drink of water here. And so, what is this narrative? Well, first of all, in my spiritual classroom, it's a narrative that is no belief in anything other than yourself, right? So we are the highest power on the planet, and in being that way, we're going to have to manipulate things so that we continue to have that upper echelon prosper and the lower echelon be either, worker bees or, dead. It just is the way that it is, right? And that is, the treatment of people in all of these. I was looking for both of these books. So the treatment in all of these that are all connected. Hold on, let me clear my throat again. I know, gremlins over here that don't want me to speak out on this stuff. And that is true. There's a lot of people who don't want to speak out. So making sure that you're making the correlations between what they were talking about communist interrogation here in the 84th congressional meeting on communist tactics, right? So, and the correlation with the Robbers Cave study that we've been talking about, and now the background information that I'm getting on the Robbers Cave study from Gina Perry. And again, this was 2019. Robbers Cave was 1956. So, So what was interesting here was John B. Watson. So I'm going to get to I really made a commitment to get to our slides today. So we'll see how that goes, how that commitment goes. We'll see. I made it to myself. I can break it. I didn't make it to you. Not yet. Dr. Watson regarded as the father of behaviorism. So this is what we teach at the universities. This is what we teach. John B. Watson. And we talk about, father of behaviorism and the experimental design. That because the outcome of behaviorism, or right there, with behaviorism and an outcome, as they were becoming more and more empirical and more scientific, and then throwing out things that were unscientific, which is just like unbelievably ironic. It's unbelievably ironic. So they began the experimental discipline as well. So they were really the founding fathers of experimental psychology, which really, is all about measuring and good, clear measurements. Well, I'm saying, right, as a student of psychology, what I was learning was that John B. Watson, the father of behaviorism, then therefore has this experimental mind that is studying rats, not people, but apparently people like rats, right? Rats like rats, and then apparently people like rats. And why or how can they do that? The only way that they can do that is with a deep belief that there are certain human beings that are meant to be studiers, and there are certain human beings that are meant to be studied. And that's the bottom line. But Watson did little Albert study, which I was going to talk to you about. And lo and behold, here it is in Gina Perry's The Lost Boys. So talking about the study of little Albert. And I present this to my students. I present this study to my students almost all the time in order for us to distinguish even just disciplines. So the original discipline of behaviorism, if I want to distinguish that from psychoanalysis, I need to talk about what is behaviorism, and inevitably John B. Watson's name comes up, father of behaviorism, right? And then again, make it clear that here is then our road to, our conduit to experimental design, our experimental design. And might I say that really the people who perfected the experimental design really were psychologists, and I'll tell you why. Because we had to work with so many variables. Biologists, they can control so many things were controllable, where the human being, there were so many things that were not controllable. So we had to stick to the experimental design more closely because there were so many other variables. So the people who really perfected the experimental design really were psychologists, and that we came to really know the difference in, or the value of, controlling for all these other variables. That was easy to do with an inanimate object, or with something that was alive but couldn't move, like a leaf or a cell, or move, under the microscope, but I could follow it, right? So we really needed to have really refined measures if we're going to measure something like self-esteem, those kinds of things. Let's take a look at some of the experiments here. You can look up the experiment of little Albert. I want to finish this thought and then I'll move on from little Albert and Watson. But here, what this says is, you can see pictures of little Albert online, leaning away from Watson, who is looming over him wearing a scary mask. Little Albert is famous as a child subject who proved Watson's theory that emotional responses can be learned and unlearned, a process that became known as classical conditioning. Now, this is exactly what they're talking about here, is what they did in the communist Korean POW camps that held our U.S. prisoners, right? So prisoners of war, POW camp, who held our prisoners of war. This is exactly what they were doing here. Classical conditioning. In fact, where I put the marker right here is what I wanted to read to you about classical conditioning. But let me finish the thought here with little Albert so I can close this page over here. At least close this page. Watson paired the loud and frightening noise of a hammer hitting a metal bar with the appearance of a small rat, a white rat. Albert, who had reached happily for the animal at first, soon came to associate it with the terrifying noise and became agitated and afraid whenever the rat and later other furry animals appeared. We'll never know whether Albert's mother volunteered Albert willingly and discovered too late what the research involved, or whether she was coerced to hand Albert over, but she took Albert away abruptly before Watson and his assistant, graduate student Rosalie Rayner, had a chance to decondition the baby's fear of furry animals. Okay, so she took Albert out of the study. They didn't have a chance to decondition him. How do they condition him? Let's take a look at classical conditioning, which I happen to have and have had this slide on. Okay. So here in classical conditioning, what ends up happening is individuals are making associations, and they're making associations unconsciously. They don't really understand the effect or the outcome. It is happening subconsciously, all right? So classical conditioning happens there on a subconscious level without us even knowing. So what occurs there? Well, you can see that we have classical conditioning that is different than operant conditioning. And operant conditioning is something that is rewarded, right? So behavior that is rewarded, positive reinforcement, we do that behavior over and over again. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked about the slide that talked about how we should distribute positive reinforcement, right? So should we give large rewards or severe punishment, or small rewards and mild punishment? So when we do these small rewards and mild punishment, what you end up doing is you get a lasting change. Now remember, that is really what they're looking for in communist China, right? Or Korea and communist countries. They're not looking for an attitude change that's temporary. They want an attitude change that's long lasting, that demonstrates that I can follow as a soldier these rules and regulations. I'm a soldier, right? I'm going to rebel. I'm going to rebel. I'm going to rebel unless I believe what I'm doing down deep in my heart, which is long-lasting change. So this is the reason why we see here in the tactics that what communism is using is not these large rewards or severe punishment. Remember what I said. They had abandoned the idea of torture. What they are using is they are using small rewards, friendship-based rewards, and mild punishment, right? Isolation away from, right, friends after I've met some friends in prison and had a chance to finally talk to somebody in prison. Now that's a great reward for me, and now I can manipulate that reward, right? Small manipulation of that punishment, and it's going to have greater long-lasting effects. I'm going to really want to listen to my friend and what my friend is telling me that I don't realize is coming from communist propaganda, right? And remember what we said propaganda is. Propaganda really is, what we're looking at is lies. What we're looking at are people telling lies to influence. Oh, I went the wrong way. To influence people and people's minds the way we want them to be influenced. So here is a demonstration of propaganda, right? So the cigarette campaign, which by the way is interesting, now we're propagandizing marijuana, for example. And we've got more people smoking marijuana, but only 1 in 10 are smoking compared to prior to the 20th century. So how has advertising affected cigarette sales? Prior to the 20th century, 99% of the cigarette smokers were men. In 1955, 52% were men and 34% were women. So here we see now, like the Virginia Slims ad, now as soon as I begin with the propaganda towards somebody else, it has a great effect. So in the 1800s, the only person who smoked, because remember, if you go to our Bookless classroom, what you'll find is that the smoking occurred as basically a drug sold here in the United States, tobacco in Virginia, it was our first export. It was the first way that we could make money. They were looking for gold. We didn't find gold. We didn't have furs to trade because we couldn't move past the Indians into the West for fur trading, so we didn't have that. We weren't finding anything that we were mining that gave minerals, right? So we didn't have any of this. So what we do? I don't know how tobacco. I wish they had a cornerstone of freedom book on tobacco. That would be great. How did that crop really get started? I'll probably look in my Encyclopedia Britannica for something like that. And so that all occurred in the 1800s when they had the crop of tobacco. But who was smoking? Men were smoking. 99% of the smokers were men. Now you can see here how propaganda then changes people's minds, how it influences. So advertising began advertising to women. Virginia Slims, you've come a long way, baby. Who are you if you're not smoking a cigarette? And they also made them slimmer, so they were more feminine. They also, really, I don't think that they probably did have a regular one, but really, mostly, Virginia Slims menthol lights. So a very light cigarette, not a lot of smoke, and a menthol taste, and a thin, slimming cigarette. It looked very feminine. They even had these long sticks that you would put a cigarette on the end of. You could see one in one of the Carol Burnett skits and other classic TV shows, or, classic movies. So you can see how propaganda can really change individuals' minds. In 2012, because there were there were advertising campaigns against cigarettes, we can see that the percentage dropped significantly from 52% men, 34% of women were smoking, to 21% of men and 19% of women in 2012. After the whole campaign went down. But now we've got, foreign sales were skyrocketing, and we're going to probably see the same thing then with marijuana as well. Sales for smoking, 1 in 10. So only 10% of individuals on average are smoking. That's smoking cigarettes, tobacco. So that's an incredibly low number. Okay, so we see how propaganda sort of takes fire, and what they're talking about here is individuals who are being classically conditioned. All right, so soon afterwards, all right, so that is the beginning of classical conditioning. I hear a loud noise. All right, and so that's what we wanted to look at right here, right? So what is classical conditioning? I hear a loud noise, and what it's paired with is a neutral stimulus. All right, so stimulus number 2 is a neutral stimulus, is what that is. So we've got a fear-inducing stimulus, which is a natural fear. At a very young age, we are afraid of loud noises as an infant, and we are afraid of falling, for example. And I'm just thinking about, right now, I'm thinking about that book, Allie, and some of the things Allie Brosh wrote in Hyperbole and a Half. And some of the fears that Allie had in there is coming right to mind right now. Right now, it's coming right to mind. And the refrigerator bothered. So the sounds of the refrigerator, for example, bothered Allie. So sounds. And think about, there is this real movement towards this aversion towards things touching the skin, right? We no longer have tags on our clothes any longer. So this whole idea of sensory kind of dysfunction, I don't have the right word there, sensory overload. Your senses get overwhelmed. Well, that shouldn't be. It could be because of medication, certainly could be because of medication, and vaccines are medication, a form of medication. So it absolutely could be because of medication, all right? That we have the sensitivity, right? But the associations, that's the thing that I'm talking about, these classical conditioning kinds of associations that are being made so that a refrigerator noise is giving you sort of what the feeling, right? The feeling. So think about these sort of sensory malfunctions that people have, sensory overloads that individuals have, but being much more specific about what is the overload. Is it a tag? Okay. Or is it a sound? And what's the sound? Is it dogs barking? Is it a train in the distance? Is it a running refrigerator? What are the sounds that are creating this kind of association? And we can see that this association happens automatically. But what the idea here is, from the full spectrum of things, is that we're talking about with these studies of Robber's Cave and with Milgram's study that we're talking about is that these associations are being created when, in fact, these are normal associations that people would make, and we're looking at it as if there were some criminality to the immorality of these individuals, right? So basically what we've done is create conditions for individuals to be immoral, and then we called it something. We called it environment, or we called it biology. We called it evil genes, right? Remember that Barbara Oakley book I told you about? We called it evil genes, or we called it whatever we wanted to call it. We called it classical conditioning. We called it creating a murderer, the making of a murderer, right? We called it that. Thanks, Netflix. We called it whatever we wanted to call it. But what we've done is we have sensationalized the conditions by which we create immoral individuals. And the comment that Gina Perry starts this book with is who wouldn't be? And it's not even just this classical conditioning, in fact, that is even responsible, like we're machines. It is the environment that you've created, and now what you've done is you've created a guilt-ridden, shameful individual that you've tossed and cast aside, is what you've done, right? Or turned into a worker bee machine, right? Just turned into a machine. So we've got the knowledge, right? So let's start having babies, because we have the knowledge on how to turn those individuals into machines. It's Fascism 101 is what this is. 1956. Fascism 101. Psychology, behaviorism, creating immoral individuals, and an environment by which we've created these individuals to feel extraordinary shame and guilt for who they are. All right, so still haven't gotten this full point out. So we said, but she took Albert away abruptly before Watson and his assistant, graduate student Rosalie Rayner, had a chance to decondition the baby's fear of furry animals. Soon afterwards, Watson, the psychologist superstar who was sacked from his position at Johns Hopkins University for having an extramarital affair with the 21-year-old Rayner. Where's that in the literature? The psychologist superstar. That's what I know. I know John B. Watson is the father of behaviorism, and he is a psychologist superstar. I did not know that right after this, he was sacked from Johns Hopkins University for immoral behavior. You MFer you. The scandal made front-page news across the country, and the pair fled to Manhattan. After a shaky start, Watson enjoyed a successful second career as an advertising executive. You MFer you. You piece of shit. You piece of shit. You piece of shit, John B. Watson. I don't know, has anyone in psychology said it? You piece of shit. Oh my gosh, you piece of shit. Are you kidding me? The fate of little Albert was unlikely to be so lucky, according to Watson and Rayner. Historian of psychology Ben Harris noted that although at first they said that any fear he experienced during the experiments was transitory in a magazine article in 1920, you're talking about 1920, and we still revere that MFer in psychology. We still revere him, that MFer. He was freaking kicked out. What the hell? And then he became an advertiser, and we think that MFer is important in psychology? You fucker. Oh my gosh. It just stabs me in my psychologist's little tender heart. Holy SHIT. First, they said that any fear he experienced during the experiments was transitory. In a magazine article in 1920, they wrote that little Albert had probably suffered permanent harm, a claim made not from callousness so much as to emphasize the power of the conditioning they had conducted on the baby. On a baby. On a baby. This is how we treat our babies. Have more babies. Here's my commission. Have more babies. So the mystery of what happened to little Albert and how he was affected by the experiment remained. In his review of variations of the little Albert story in textbooks, Harris points to significant deviations in Watson's own reporting of the research and writes about how startled he was to read the original article in which Watson and Rayner commented on their lack of success in inducing fear in the rosy-cheeked baby. The story had evolved over time, embroidered and shaped to support a particular theoretical standpoint and to portray Watson as a martyred hero in the development of the discipline. He undertakes work that no one else would, Harris writes of the perception of Watson that took hold. He unemotionally pursues the truth while surrounded by the superstitious. Unfortunately, his perfectly designed experiment on Albert was cut short by the infant's ignorant, ungrateful mother. Blackmailed by his wife, betrayed by Albert's mother, Watson becomes a tragic figure, a victim of his single-minded pursuit of science. If Watson was portrayed as a tragic star of this famous story, what of little Albert? Historians of psychology have been on the trail of the now elderly or deceased Albert. So we still don't seem to have that question answered. But great work, Gina Perry, on all of that. In fact, I can't believe I didn't highlight this, which is how they could not get that startled baby to create fear. So who even knows what they were finding? They were finding their own results by a man who was kicked out of the scientific field right after he did that study. So he had no more inkling to do follow-up studies to find out anything about whether or not these conclusions, which weren't even conclusively summarized in a paper, were even true. How could this be possible? And this is the beginning of propaganda, which is basically selling this idea of classic conditioning. But again, what I started to say this was all about also is that what happened here? What happened here in Korea with our soldiers, and actually the Turkish soldiers as well, is that they could not get them to comply. They could not, as was stated there by Watson, they could not build the fear. Here in Korea, they could not get them to comply. They could not get them to succumb to classical conditioning. And the idea of classical conditioning was wildfire. It was like wildfire. It is fact. It is fact, according to John B. Watson, who was kicked out of the scientific community right after he espouses this theory, or little Albert, to demonstrate the theory of classical conditioning. It is just, if it weren't so I don't know. Deceptively insightful, it would be horrifically sad. How about that? We're past our time. They didn't get it to work. For some people, the atrocities of what they didn't get it to work. And then I'm going to find out because I think they did atrocious things to those boys. And I think they found out that some boy said, I don't care what you do to me. I don't care what you do to me. You can cut off my hand. You can pluck out my eye. And I will not do what you're telling me to do. That's what I think. And I think they want to know, who are those boys? I'll see you back here in 15 minutes for the next 2 chapters of Goosebumps. Be careful what you wish for. It's so good, isn't it? It's so good. Okay, all right. We will stop recording and we will stop streaming. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Should have recorded. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I am the teacher and we are here in the philosophical classroom. We are back here not tomorrow because this philosophical classroom is exhausting to me. It's exhausting to me. And there's another thought running right through my head about Allie's book, which I can't get into right now. So and wouldn't anyway. So we are here in the philosophical classroom. I will see you back here at the same time, 1:30 to 2:30. Right? Yeah, I can't believe. Are we done that early normally? Did I skip a classroom? Critical, spiritual, philosophical. No, I did not. I know. You'd think by day 22 we would have this down pat. Whatevs. All right. I'm out of here. I will see you in 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes for our